December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. Hostilities exist. There is no blinking at the fact that our people, our territory, and our interests are in grave danger. With confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph. So help us God.
I grew up in the Spanish Fork. I was born in Idaho Falls, but my family moved to Spanish Fork when I was about 6 months old. So I spent 85 years here in Spanish Fork, other than a couple of years in the service, a couple of years on a mission. Other than that, my whole life is here in Spanish Fork. I attended the Spanish Fork High Schools. I attended Thurber School, which is a city council building now. That was the grade school. And then the old high school has been torn down from where the administration building is now. But my whole life was here in Spanish Fork.
I was born in Payson, Utah. We moved to Spanish Fork when I was a little fellow, and I lived in Spanish Fork all my life. Went to school in Spanish Fork. I didn't graduate from the high school because I went in the service.
I grew up in a little town up in the canyon called Thistle. It's a railroad town.
Arnold grew up in the little town called Thistle. It's up the Spanish Fork Canyon off of the Highway 6. That's where his dad was working for the railroad. It was a railroad town. That's where his whole family, Arnold's whole family grew up, was in Thistle. He's the youngest of 8 kids.
Well, I was quite young. I was in the 9th grade when Pearl Harbor happened. And of course, as a 9th grader, we thought America was the greatest thing in the world. And the war would only last for a few weeks. That Japan was really stupid for making the attack there because they didn't have a chance. And so I felt that things was going to be all over by the time I got old enough to go in. But the war lasted a lot longer than we anticipated, and so I felt that America was great. America had the power to do anything they wanted in the world, and Japan wouldn't last very long. But it lasted a long time, and I felt that we had an obligation to work to help the government. We worked in the fields helping the farmers harvest their crops, and all types of work in our daily life to help the war effort.
Well, I can remember seeing the headlines on the paper, war declared, and I remember that, but I don't remember what day of the week it was or anything like that, or what I did. But I know Mother was quite concerned on account of her son Jack. And so as I told her, I says, well, when I get old enough, I'll go over and get him. Which was a dumb statement.
As the war went on, of course, we were involved in the rationing of shoes and meat and gasoline especially, and it had a big effect on our everyday life.
Arnold joined the Navy in 1941.
January 6th, I believe it was, 1941.
Then Arnold was stationed in Pearl Harbor.
Japanese are attacking Pearl Harbor. So we manned our battle stations, and of course our station was a machine gun. So we just hurried and got the machine guns ready, and when the ships started coming in, well, we was told that that's what they were, was Japanese ships attacking the U.S. ships at Pearl Harbor.
Arnold's ship was torpedoed in the harbor of Pearl Harbor, and it blew a hole in the side of it that were 40 by 40, and so they had to, as he called, hobble back to San Francisco to get patched up and fixed. And after they got fixed, and then they went out to engaged in 13 battles with other ships, and the 13th one is the one that they got torpedoed or bombed. But anyway, it hit right where the first time they got hit, and it split the ship just right in half. And so a piece of metal of it hit him in the ankle and busted his ankle, and so they had to get off of the ship. And then about 3 hours later, a rescue ship came by and picked them up.
My first reaction when the war broke out was concern for my brother. He had enlisted before I was even in high school, and he went to the Philippine Islands. And he was captured when Corregidor fell in the Philippines. And he was put on a ship and shipped to Japan as a prisoner of war, and he worked in the mines over there for 3.5 years. And like any teenager, as soon as I was old enough to join up and get in the service, I was going to go over and save my brother.
Him and my mother-in-law were newlyweds, and so he was stationed at Pearl Harbor, and that's was a shock to them, because when it happened, they wouldn't allow to send any kind of messages home. No, the only thing that he got to send was a telegram saying, "I'm safe."
When I was in the 9th grade, the National Guard was called up to active duty, and they were supposed to leave for a year's training in California and Washington. And of course, while they were involved in their training, that's when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. So they stayed in as active duty, and we as young guys thought that it was great. Someday maybe we'd get a chance to go in, but didn't think it would last that long. We were quite bitter towards Japan, of course, and thought it was not the right thing, sneak attack like that. And so we were really going to, if we had a chance, we'd go in and show the Japs what was happening.
Arnold always had a hard time dealing with the war of because at Pearl Harbor, the morning that it happened, one of his friends wanted him to stay in the library and play checkers or whatever that they were going to do. and he didn't want to. He decided he wanted to go up to the top where it was quiet and write a letter to his wife, and things like that. After that happened, the war, the bombing, he had such a hard time really speaking about a lot about what happened. It's I guess a lot of memories that he don't want to talk about. When it got hit, the ship got hit, it was right where the library was at, and so I guess, I don't know if it was like 23 or 26 of his mates that died that day.
Well, when we went to Pearl Harbor, I was quite amazed at all the ships and that, and how the trees and that were bare of branches from being bombed and whatnot.
What we found out through, we went to Pearl Harbor with him 6 years ago, and we went to the memorial there, and his ship was one of the first ones that got hit because of where they were docked at, because they were supposed to be going out that day, and that Saturday, and that Sunday their main generator burned up, and so they had to turn around and come back in and dock to get their generator redone, fixed, and the next morning, December the 7th, is when the attack happened at Pearl Harbor.
In 1944, the war had been going on for 3 years and wasn't looking too good, and the government was drafting young men as soon as they turned 18. They were also drafting a lot of young fathers, and they were leaving their family. And this is when I was a senior in high school. And so I was still only 17 at the time, but I knew that as soon as I turned 18 that I would be drafted into the Army, and I wasn't too happy about going in the Army. I preferred the Navy, and so 5 of my friends and myself was looking into the different programs, and the Navy recruiting office seemed to have the best program.
I joined the service. I think I went to school about 2 months of my senior year, and I tried to enlist in the Navy, but the Navy wouldn't take me. And so I finally hounded my mother, and so much that she finally decided she'd sign for me to go in the service. So I went to the Coast Guard, and they accepted me. But I had to have her signature to get in the service. I was only 17. And it's been interesting.
We enlisted in the Navy in February of 1944. I was still in high school, but the Navy put us on inactive duty until we graduated from high school. It was in February that we signed up, and graduation was in May. So from February to May, that seemed like a real long time. So we just really weren't worried. We walked around high school feeling really big because we were in the service already. But a week before graduation, we received a letter from the Navy Department saying, "You will report for active duty at Great Lakes Naval Training Station, and you will leave Salt Lake on the 19th of May. So 3 days after we graduated from high school, there was 5 of us that left Spanish Fork and boarded the train for Great Lakes, Illinois. And there we trained and went into the service from there.
I joined the service on account of my brother being a prisoner of war over there. I was like every other teenager. I was invincible, and I was going to go over and get him out of being a prisoner of war. That was my mental state on joining the service. I made it pretty close. I got to Okinawa.
The Navy had a good program that appealed to us. I had dabbled a little bit in amateur radio while I was in high school, and at that time radar was just a new thing, and the Navy needed a lot of radar technicians, and so they had a program that you could take this test before you enlisted, and if you passed it, they would automatically assign you to radio technician school. You'd go through boot camp and then radio technician school. And that was the five of us all took the test and we passed it. And of course, then when we passed it, the Navy says, you passed the test, time to go in now. And so the program there was one that was more appealing than the Army had to offer as going into the infantry, and I wasn't going to. So that there wasn't really much choice. It was just a thing that happened, and the program was great, and they offered us a chance to go in where we were guaranteed to go into radio technician school after boot camp.
My first trip shipping out, I took boot camp training at Catalina Island. And then my first assignment to ship out, I went to Hawaii on a ship called the Atchison, SS Atchison. And we were only over in there long enough to unload our cargo, and then we came back. And my second trip on a ship was in a big convoy going to Okinawa. And there must have been 80, maybe 90 ships in the convoy. And they put all the cargo ships and the tankers and that in a kind of an inside, and the sub chasers and destroyers were on the outside of the convoy. And when we went to Okinawa, we were under attack with 3 submarines, Japanese submarines. The sub chasers sank 2 of them, and the other one hightailed it before they ever got to the ships. They didn't sink any of the ships.
So I went in, and it was a real rigorous course, and there was 50% of them after the first month that were eliminated from the radio technician school. And I was one of them that was eliminated. And I went back, and then they gave us our choice of any other service school that we wanted to attend. And so I ended up attending a basic engineering, which is training for the engine room of a ship. And then I went into the diesel school and went into diesel mechanics and had the training there. And in this diesel school, we were trained for maintaining and operating the diesel engines on landing craft. And at that time, the big push in the Pacific was making landings on the various islands to regain their control from Japan. And so they needed a lot of people to work in this field. And so I had a chance to train as a diesel mechanic, and went on from there.
Oh, when we got to Okinawa, we anchored in a bay. I don't know what it was, but this big tornado come up, and they made us sail out into the China Sea while that tornado passed. But I'll tell you, them waves were higher than this building. And then when we went back into the harbor and anchored, we were there for, well, 121 days. So I don't know how long that'd be, but we were under attack by Jap kamikazes, maybe one a week, but they'd they'd come in so low that you couldn't shoot at them because you'd hit the other ships. And the ship I was on, we had 4 20-millimeter guns, 2 port side and 2 starboard side. And then on the bow, we had a 3.5-inch cannon. And on the aft, we had a 5-inch cannon. And that's the only guns we had on that ship.
When I was in diesel school, we trained, like I said, for landing craft for the Pacific Islands, and I was assigned to the amphibious forces and was to go to Shoemaker, California and ship out there and be in the amphibious forces. But the last week of the school, they wanted volunteers to go on to convoy duty on destroyer escorts in the Atlantic. And a friend talked me into signing up for that. So I was the 49th man out of the 50 draft that signed up for this convoy duty. And so I didn't go to the Pacific, but I went to Norfolk, Virginia, and was assigned to the commander of the Northwest African Waters with their headquarters in Algiers, Africa. And we was put on a troop ship and traveled across the Atlantic Ocean. And in Naples, they took the draft and split us in two, and half of us went to Palermo, Sicily. And I was one that went to Palermo and was assigned to a ship repair unit. So instead of running landing craft in the Pacific, I was in a ship repair unit in Palermo, Sicily, which was the naval operating base for the Mediterranean. And the ships that had been damaged or somewhat out of commission would come into our shipyard, and we would repair those ships and then send them back out to duty. So I never got in any combat duty, but I did have a good experience in this repairing ships and working on several different types of ships rather than just on the landing craft.
The most frightening experience was like I explained on the ship how many guns we had, and the CBs on board ship, whoever got to the gun first, they was the one that strapped themselves into the gun, 20 millimeters, and the other one was the one that changed the ammunition. We had big canisters that weighed 50 pounds you'd have to lift up and hook on. But I never did have to strap in. I had a good gunman on mine. He was always on the ball.
When we arrived in Naples, it was really an eye-opener because Naples had been bombed by the Allies before Italy surrendered, and then the Americans and English had bombed that place and just really riddled it. And then, of course, they occupied it, chased the Germans out, and so then the Germans come back and they bombed it. And there wasn't hardly anything in that port or in the area that was standing. It had just really been demolished. And the same thing when we got to Palermo. We come into the harbor and all of the buildings in the harbor was just demolished. And it was amazing to me to see the destruction that the war brought about. And it was quite an eye-opener.
Anyway, when we got unloaded, we came back to the States. We came back to Seattle, I believe is where we docked. And from there I came home, was home for 2 weeks. And I went back, reported back, and they asked for volunteers to get on a troop ship to go to the Philippine Islands and bring back a bunch of nurses and that. So I volunteered for that. we went over and picked up all these nurses, and my job on that trip was waiting on them like a waiter. We served them 2 different groups for breakfast and 2 different groups for supper. And that was our job, is to pack their food and that to them. But it was a great experience.
After the war ended, the ambassador from Turkey to the United States died in Washington, D.C. And instead of putting his body on the airplane and flying him back to Turkey where his home was, the government brought the USS Missouri, which was the battleship that the peace treaty, the Japanese peace treaty, had signed on. And so they put this ambassador's body aboard the Missouri and took him to Turkey. And our ship and a couple of others met the Missouri at Gibraltar, and then we escorted her across the Mediterranean up to Istanbul, Turkey. And at the time I thought that was the most ridiculous thing in the world, because they could have flown him home a lot cheaper than all those ships going up there to take him home. But later on I realized that at that time a conflict between Russia and the United States and Turkey over the Mediterranean and over the Black Sea, and the entrance to the Black Sea from the Mediterranean was really a stickler. And I realize now that the government sent the Missouri over there because it was a well-known battleship, and they wanted to show Russia that the United States still had power in the Mediterranean. And so it makes sense that they made that little power play. At the time, I didn't realize what it was, but so to accompany the Missouri, which is probably a well-known battleship, across to the Mediterranean, across to Turkey, was probably a real great experience. And then the Missouri come back to Naples to stay for a few days to give the crew a chance to see Italy, and I was assigned temporary duty on the Missouri, so that's one of my claim to fame. I spent 2 weeks at running the Liberty boats from the Missouri onto the shore.
The name of that ship that we went over to the Philippine Islands was the SS Brazil. And you can't believe that little island of Corregidor, where my brother was captured. It's just a big rock sitting out in the middle of the bay, Manila Bay. And he missed the Bataan Death March because they lasted for 3 months before they fell to the Japanese. And they stuck it out for 3 months there, and then finally he was captured, which was probably to his benefit. So he didn't get on that Bataan Death March.
After the ship got sunk, he came back to Long Beach, and while he was waiting to be discharged from the Navy, he worked decommissionizing ships until after he got out of the Navy. And then he came back to Spanish Fork and got hired on for the Fish and Game. And then he worked for the Fish and Game for close to about 38 years and retired from the Fish and Game. He used to work in the main office in Salt Lake for about 11 years. And then after that, then he got stationed in Springville and finished out his years in Springville at the fish hatchery there. Arnold didn't start talking about this till about 12 years ago, and his experience about the war and stuff, he finally started talking about it, and he wrote a lot of the stuff down to where for his grandkids and great-grandkids can read.
While I was in the military, I can't say as I liked it, I can't say as I disliked it. It was just something that I felt like I had to do.
I feel that it was a great experience. I wouldn't trade it for anything. I made a lot of real good friends. I saw a lot of the world. I had this great experience, and it was something that had to be done. At the time, we really didn't have a choice of whether we go in or not. You'd be drafted if we didn't enlist, and we didn't feel bad about it because we knew that it had to be done because there was a war on and we wanted to protect our country and serve it as best we could.
As far as feeling like I had to do something, I didn't mind it a bit because that was something I wanted to do.
Felt that I had done what was expected of me, and that the government was just real generous in repaying for the time I spent in the service. I still feel that I'm owe my country something, and I'll never be able to completely repay them.